Yo, Nagad, Dakwadoa, Cara Cowan Watts. So, everyone, this is Cara Cowan Watts with Cherokee411, and we're here today with Tatianna Duncan. I had the honor and pleasure of serving with her as her vice president to back her up at the American Indian Chamber of Commerce of Oklahoma, the Tulsa chapter last year. And I will tell you that was a pleasure to get to know her. So she is a Cherokee Creek woman that I'm very proud to know. Always excited to watch her in her warrior spirit. And she's going to tell us about herself as a Cherokee, a Creek. She's going to talk to us about her nonprofit, the Lucinda Hickory Research Institute. She's going to talk to us about her professional life before she started this journey to tell her family story, and then tell us about the book she wrote. Um, and there's more to it, but we want to hear from her today. Tatianna, tell us who you are.
Tatianna Duncan, Johojikros, Ki Chalagi, Muskogalagi, Aldawe Kwasadi Dawaz, Nogoshagi Dawaz. I'm Tatianna Duncan. I'm a Cherokee Muskogee native. My tribal town is Kwasadi and my clan is Bear, and that's on the Creek side because we go with what our mother is, right? And I always say that tribal town is where I am from. It is not where I've been, which kind of brings all this history, to light for me. My grandmother on my Creek side was Luwina Hickory, and my grandfather was William Sunday. My great grandfather was Pooh Sunday, who was a U.S. Marshal in Indian Territory. And I'm still not sure how all that plays out in the realm of our history in those times where, the changing times that we became a whole different people, actually, from, boarding school to forced assimilation.
Is there anything else that you might want to tell people about who you are as a Cherokee or even a Creek that they might be related to you so they know when they're
So
watching this?
this is why I think this history has been so important to me. I almost feel like I've been an Indian my whole life. There's none of this. I didn't know I was an Indian growing up or my great great grandmother. I've always known. And I've always felt kind of like on the outside because I wasn't part of tradition or community. I always say that I come from culture shock, not culture at all. So, and I think that's a lot of us actually. So I grew up in Jay, Oklahoma, or we had a chicken farm in Uchi. So I grew, yeah, 10,000 chickens. We had 5 to 7,000 eggs a day. I worked hard as a little girl. I was stronger than most men, and they didn't want to admit that, but I'll admit it for them. So yeah, I graduated from Jay, Oklahoma in 1982. So that was the era. And I was related to the Sunday family in that area. And as I, learn more, there's a lot of Sundays out there. So I come from Pooh Sunday, William Sunday, and those guys. I that curb in Disney. A lot of people go out to Grand Lake, right? That's the area it was in. They go to that Grand Lake area, and there's this really steep curve that says Disney something. It's been so long. That was my Aunt Sally's house, who I talk about in my book. But they all passed in the 80s. They had all the answers that I have to dig into paperwork to find. So that's where I grew up. We moved out there when I was like in the sixth grade. And this is where I consider home, is Oklahoma.
Okay, well, very good. So you grew up in Jay, Creek mom, Cherokee dad, but you grew up inside the Cherokee Nation. You then go, is that when you entered the military? Or how
Yes.
quickly, like,
Um, so in Jay, Oklahoma in the 80s, there were not a lot of opportunities. And then coming from the background I did not to make any misunderstandings, a lot of people were educated. My sister has 2 master's degrees, but when it's time to send kids to college, I guess parents have to pick and choose. Well, that one's smart. That one, she can make it out in the military. So that's kind of how I ended up in the military. Our schools did not prepare Native children for college. I was told that they prepared other students, but when it came to Indians, we got called in, the week or two before graduation, which is what happened. And my counselor said, "Hey, have you taken your ACT test?" And I'm like, "What's an ACT test?" So, there was no preparation at all for college. So I worked on the farm for about a year when a recruiter called my house looking for the smart sister to put her in the officer program. And my mom's like, "Well, I have another one." Because one thing right out of high school, I did get 2 marriage proposals that summer, but I knew I wasn't ready for that either. I knew I needed to live a little first.
Did I lose you?
No, I just
Okay.
stopped.
Oh, I was like, hold on. All
Yeah,
right.
I
So,
left Jay when I was 19 and I never really went back. It's a great community, very slow. Um, it's kind of nice sometimes just to go out there and not have to worry about all the things we worry about in the city.
so how long did you spend in the military?
Oh,
Is that where you met
so
your husband?
that's where I met my husband. 4 years active duty, and the rest was the reserves because I started a family and I didn't want to
Okay.
balance them. In the Navy, that's a very demanding career. And I guess most careers are. My husband was out to sea a lot, so it felt like I was a single mom, raising my kids and working, and I did my reserve time. I did a lot of reserve time because I was in a command that could afford a lot of active duty for their service members. So I could do anywhere from 2 to 300 days a year, which is almost a full-time job. I was just able to work it around my family events and demands, that type of thing. So I worked on F-18 aircraft. That was my specialty as an aircraft engine mechanic in the military. And it is a sink or swim environment. So, and I feel like that's my whole life, honestly. You get thrown into this world of predominantly men at the time. It was a very discriminatory, harassing environment, but you learn to swim for sure. And I feel like my mom raised me and prepared me for that. She always called it being Indian. Being Indian, it was something. Being Indian, I don't trust nobody. That's what she'll say to this day. If you go visit her, I guarantee you that will come up in conversation. And after I've done the history, I see why that hurt just really lasts. And yeah, as an adult, you can learn not to trust, but when you are taught that from, as early as you're taught your name, that's a big lesson in life. So,
So,
yeah.
how long ago during this process did you start your journey to do the physical academic research that
Yeah.
you've done to put into this book? Because that's if I'm mischaracterizing it, tell me. But that's the way I understand kind of your process here.
That was my process. There was a time we didn't have access to the records like we do today. The questions have always been there. You always heard the adults talking. And the sad part to me, not that they were all hard workers. How the aunts and uncles and my mother, they'd pull all their money together to get an attorney to fix these land problems. And the attorney would take the money and nothing would ever happen. And that's not just our story. I've been to different seminars and I'll always hear somebody get up and have the same repeated story. Our extra money goes into attorneys to try and solve restricted land issues. That's still a problem to this day. And I hope that at some point we get to that. But back on topic, so I was just scrolling through Facebook one day and I see Chugabachi, who is the original Lati. We're gathering places today because he is the original Lati. His name comes up and people were doing history on him. So I made a comment, and then JD Colbert, who has been, if you know JD, he does a lot of history in Tulsa. That's how we connected right there from that Facebook post. And yeah, we've talked ever since. He just started putting all this information that he had in my email. And once I started reading it, I never put it down since. And that was in maybe 2017. So
Okay.
yeah,
So very
almost.
good. So this has been like a 9 year process for you then.
Yes, it
8 or
has. It's been
9 years.
a lifetime of questions. And even when the internet first started, one of the first things I looked up was my grandmother's name because there was always these questions and we wanted answers. At work, they said, you can put anything in the internet or whatever we called it back then, the World Wide Web, and it will give you an answer. And I'm like, anything? I don't think that's true. And I'll be darned if I didn't put in Luwina Hickory Sunday, and this testimony that I've used since came up. It was very haunting. And when you read her testimony about how they don't want to sell their land, how do you go from here to they stole our land? It was really confusing to me. And I just thought, well, maybe the family didn't understand. But clearly, Luwana says we don't want to sell our land. We want to hold on to it, yet somehow we don't have it to this day. So that was the process. And it was very overwhelming. There's a trigger warning because if you get into it and your history's like mine, it can be traumatic. The anxiety flared and there was depression involved too, because one is overwhelming. I'm not an academic. I am a mechanic, which, we have at a level of intelligence, but it's just a different thing. So it was a little frustrating having to read all the not unnecessary things to get to the necessary. Um, so that's kind of where it started. And I know I would be on the phone talking to somebody and I was in a panic on the inside and I'd be on the outside looking at myself saying, what are you saying? Just stop talking already. Because the anxiety just was really bad. I think because did people even care about this? I cared about it. And as you know, I do to this day. But, and did this really happen? When you read some of these documents, it is hard to believe what you're seeing in my eyes. And I'm like, maybe I read it wrong. Maybe I didn't get it right. But I've talked to attorneys and all sorts of different scholars along the way, and they said it's exactly what you think. And it's like, but nobody does anything. That's the biggest thing. No, but attorneys, people are involved in, especially in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Everybody knows about it. Nobody talks about it, and nobody will make it right. I don't know how you're going to make it right, but you could at least talk about it and acknowledge it.
Okay, so let's pause for just a second. So for the folks that haven't had a chance to read your book or hear you talk about it in person or maybe in a lecture or an event, um, and we're going to let them know about your future events because you're going to send us the news releases.
Yes, ma'am.
So if they were disturbed about what happened in Osage Nation, they need to understand, and tell me if I'm mischaracterizing, that this happened in Tulsa to our Creeks and Cherokees as well.
This happened in Indian Territory from north to south, east to west. There is a document called Oklahoma's Poor Rich Indians that was put together by the Indian Rights Association back in, I think, 1923. And all the tribes are going to be in there. Um, Killers of the Flower Moon was, eye-opening to a lot of people. I've had people say, well, that's because they were the wealthiest. It's actually, I think, because of the way they managed their land as opposed to us. Ours was all divided up into individuals. Theirs became one entity, and you had the head rights. But it is just that horrific. It's hard to find the evidence because they did not investigate Indian deaths. And are we still not living that legacy to this day? They're not investigating our deaths properly or our missing people. So nothing has changed in all these years. So it is hard to find evidence. But when I scroll through documents and I find a financial account record that says carbolic acid, I'm like, what did I just trip upon? It was shocking to me. I look up carbolic acid and it is used as a sanitizer back in the day, household cleaner, but also murders and suicides arise from it. And then you find an article on poisoning of Indians. It's been around since statehood. People have been putting Indians out of the way by the poison roots in statehood. That's what the newspaper article said. But you're not going to find a lot on it. I could only find that one article. As you said, my events, I'm talking with the College of Mvskoke Nation now because I would like Native scholars to investigate this further. They have a lot of the energy because they're young to get into this and to do this background. Maybe they can find something I've not been able to, is what I'm hoping. They can investigate the poisoning, the deaths, the amount of young Native men that went to prison at this time of the land allotments to me was a lot. I've never counted them. That's something else I'm hoping that our Native scholars, somebody might find it, their calling to investigate those because it was all a breakdown in our families and in our structure. And I can tell you, I have stories all day long, but my book will tell of our stories. I just like to be supportive and let people know that I know there's more out there. This was not just an Osage problem or a Creek problem. All of us experienced it. I've talked to many Cherokees, and the stories you hear is like, you should look into that further, honestly. I have one document that says my great grandfather sold his land to his children. Well, actually, sold his interest in his deceased wife's land to his children. It's like, wow, why did he do that? But then as he tries to go home, he's run off. That's part of my book. And you have to say, it looks like he sold his land, but did he? The guardian was in charge of all that. And what's the X's and thumbprints? I don't know. I don't trust them, especially when you
So
hear
is that on the Cherokee side or the Creek
that's
side?
on the Creek side. What I found
Okay.
on my Cherokee side, I haven't investigated our land because there again, when I talked to the realty office in Cherokee Nation, oh, he sold it. He sold it. Now, my great grandfather, Pooh Sunday, was an Indian marshal. Um, he did speak English and Cherokee, and that's what I think is amazing about a lot of our Indians at the time. They could speak Creek, Cherokee, and all the different languages, especially to come with a stereotype of being dumb and drunk. That I try to get rid of that theory in my book because it's offensive and it just wasn't true. Yes, there might have been drinking problems, but they don't talk about the grief involved with all the relatives dying around them or how their land is being stolen. But on the Cherokee side, I discovered letters, not knowing what I was going to find in Lenexus, Kansas. I was looking through some boarding school records, and at Haskell, my uncles went there, and they were always running away. They always ran away from that boarding school. They didn't want to be there. Um, and then, of course, the BIA would charge the family's estate for them to, track them down and bring them back. But it was
What?
like,
I
yes,
don't remember this tidbit. Wow. Okay.
I was kind of surprised at that too. Hey, you still owe us this from when your son ran away or something like that. They were very, very smart men. That I don't think there were any sisters, at least not that I saw there. All their grades were very high at the boarding school, and I found that very interesting. And they didn't really have a couple of them were bank robbers. A couple of my uncles became bank robbers, and some became military, and all sorts of things. It was a very I think challenging time for Indians because, as we all know, you can send them to boarding school, tell them they got to go back and be white, but when they get back home, they're still Indian, and people treated them that way. And I saw one. My aunt said, "Well, I would like to work in retail, but they won't hire a Creek." I'm like, "Wow, that was a real thing for them." Yet they want to talk about how they're lazy and don't do anything. Um, those are all the things that I read in these legal documents and BIA correspondence, and it's unnerving. And I think it's important for us to understand what they were experiencing at the time, and that perhaps they weren't the improvident Indian that the documents try to make them out to be. Things are very seldom what they seem in this, is how I say. Take your oral history and, believe in your ancestors because they were definitely raking their names through the mud.
Wow. So at Cherokee 411, we cover all three Cherokee tribes. So if during your process and your continued research with your family, if you find that somebody was murdered or missing in your family, even historically, we want to name their names in our community database that we're building. And so it sounds like in your book, you're primarily talking about your Creek ancestors, which is important too, because they're our neighbors. A
Yeah,
lot of us, not my family, we had ties to the Creek Nation, but we're not by blood. There was a minister that was over, anyway, long story, but for another show. Um, but there's a lot of relationships there. And I think it's important to tell our neighbor stories at times.
yeah,
So this book outlines really what's happening to your family that is parallel with how Tulsa was built on this stolen
yeah.
land. Is that correct?
Absolutely correct. I don't see it any other way. When Tugabachi's estate sold for $52,400, that's an equivalent to about $1.5 million today. That's a lot of money. Most of it goes to the surviving, because between Tugabachi dying and his estate finally being sold 7 years later, a lot of people were dropping dead at that time. And I mean, on
Wow.
all sides, there's a natural process in life. It was a wild, wild west. I know people just died young sometimes, but there are always suspicious circumstances around all these deaths. Their money always seemed to go to real estate developers, the kids. When I think each one of them got $14,400 a piece, which is equivalent to, was it 300 or 33,000? But it's a lot of money. And the Guardian gives it out to real estate developers and people of Tulsa, and it charges, large fees for himself. Of course, the kids end up with, I think the largest amount out of 14,000, my uncle got $800. And I don't think he got it. It just rolled over to the next financial statement because they controlled the money. And for a family of wealth, and somebody pointed this out to me, I think it was JD, because there's so many aspects to this. When you look at Jenny Hickory, who's my great grandmother, given Tugabachi died, Ned Tugabachi died, they had allotments. Her dad, Moses Cooney, died, her daughter died, and all this land was part of her estate, except it was all sold off. And Lucinda's land was, mineral rich. So she was very feasibly a wealthy person or heiress. But of course, her demise came early too, and her land was the biggest of the family fight because it was the home. So that is, I think, one of the important things that I find suspicious, and obviously the Indian Rights Association, because they called it the crime of 1908. That is the Act of May 27th, 1908, that says once a native died or an Indian died, the heirs or their guardian could sell their land. That makes it a convenient transaction for grafters and oil speculators. And our population during those 10 years from 1910 to 1920 dropped by 23% while other populations rose. So you can't convince me there wasn't something dirty going on. And
Yes.
yeah, not to mention there's a random oral history that you hear when you're in a crowd of natives. People say, well, my uncle was shot. You know, we hear about all these people dying and you just write it off as, that's his life. But a lot of this stuff I do believe was intentional. And I would like it to be more, involved in our history because at some point our sovereignty has to be respected. And so far it has not been, not in the way that it should anyway. So, yeah.
Okay, so we've got our listeners have a lot to digest. I hope that this is enough for them to stop, buy the book, and read it because it's incredible. They're going to look on our page for upcoming events where they can see you present on the book. You guys are doing groundbreaking work that really needs to be told, especially in the context. What happened in the 20s to North Tulsa was not the only story about how Tulsa was built on other people.
That's right.
So
Yeah.
I think that's important for all of us to talk about. Is there, before we say goodbye to our listeners, is there anything else that you would like to add that they need to know before they purchase your book and read it? Is there something else that they need to know about?
Anything. So my book, Indian Territory, Surviving 160 Acres of Betrayal, you can buy it at any book format. You'd have to order it. It's not like they carry it, including Amazon. It's important we
And we're
have.
going to put a link on our
Okay.
website to you're going to be in our Amazon store as a book we recommend.
Okay. I'm pretty happy with the considering I'm a self-published indie author, as they call them, and I've done very little. I haven't even had a book read yet, because there's not a rush. The book is done now, and everything will fall into place. But the conversation is important, and it's important it's told from a Native perspective. Research, everything needs to be done from our Native perspective. I work with non-Natives in this, and they are very, very helpful. But I don't always see things the way they do. I found it interesting. I had two people with PhDs tell me, they call me Tanya, you don't understand. We're talking about this Indian history, and they're going to tell me that I don't understand. It's like, I don't even know what to say. I said, I feel like my guardians are talking to me. And then things, they're like, oh, okay, sorry about that. Yeah. But yeah, it just has to be
I'm going
done.
to remember that.
Yeah. So no, there, yeah, I could talk to you all day about it, but that's it. I'm always open for discussion. If somebody thinks I got it wrong, I would like to know. I have documents to back up why I say what I do. Um, so there's that.
Well, hopefully we'll have another reason to have you back on. If
Mhm.
you find that you have any of your Cherokee relatives too that were murdered or missing historically, and that goes for any of our listeners, we want to know both contemporary and
Yeah,
historical. Because if we don't name those names and list them, just like your
even
book being written, we don't want them to be forgotten
we don't
and
want
not
them to be
known.
forgotten. And even outside of that, there's a story there. So, you're right. The conversation needs to start because even he was an Indian marshal, my great grandfather, his life still wasn't easy. They still talked about him like because the school didn't want to let his kids come home for the summer. He went down to Haskell and said, I'm having my kids. I think he used language they weren't happy about. Yeah, and they had something to say about that. So, yeah, it was definitely, it's been a definite tough transition for natives in Oklahoma, and people should be proud when they're able to accomplish even the smallest of things because it feels like the world was against us for a reason, at least this in this town for sure.
Wow, and you've given me new insight into the depth of information available in that BIA correspondence
Yeah.
for those who are listeners that do research for their families or for historical events in our tribes. So,
Yeah.
hey, Tatianna, I adore you. I'm so proud of your work. Thank you for your service to all of us and your husband,
Widow?
and this
Widow.
book that you've written.
Mhm.
So let's let her know. Let's buy her book. Let's read it and let's give her feedback. Let's go to her events. So to all those out there listening to us at Cherokee 411, Wado, thank you again. And until we see you again, have a good day. Bye.
Join the conversation. Discover stories and insights that matter to you. Subscribe to Cherokee 411 with Cara and stay connected with independent media, real, relevant, and unfiltered.